Lexi, I'm going to read. Okay. I'm going to read.
Oh boy.
Hey, Big Mama. Not Big Mama, but Big Mama. Hi, Big Mama. How's it going? Welcome. There'll be some light in a second. I'm going to read on my phone, and so that will light it up. You're the Aussie Big Mama. Hey, Ravenkind. Hello from Arizona. Hi, Laura Lynn. Is everybody ready? Hi. Can you see me? I'm here. Hope everyone's having a wonderful night or a wonderful day wherever you are. Thank you for coming to listen to this Sleepy Lady read. And I hope, I'm glad you like the soothing voice. I'm trying to be calm. Thank you. Big Mama, you're the same one, aren't you, Big Mama? Big Mama, that's you. Oh, thank your kidness. That's okay. I can see a hand and a phone. Yeah. Okay. And welcome. Anyone watching on a replay, welcome. And I hope you enjoy. Yeah, there is. Big Mama's the other one. She might be in here tonight. Well, we're going to get started, okay? When he took the job, this one's called Maggie, okay? From Cripple Creek. Okay? This is all in Colorado. We know some crazy stuff happens there, don't we? When he took the job at the Colorado Grand Casino, the new security guard did not believe in ghosts. The casino was set up in the 3-story Fairley Brothers and Lampman Block building in Cripple Creek, home of the famous Independence Lode, one of the largest gold strikes in history. The landmark building on the corner of Bennett Avenue and 3rd Street once housed a mortuary, a drugstore, a barber shop, office space. Oh, thank you, Heidi Lynn Wolf. Thank you so much. That's so sweet. Very kind of you. Thank you. You didn't have to do that, but I appreciate it. Thank you. Makes me feel special. Special. Thank you. It once housed a mortuary, a drugstore, a barber shop, office space for prominent physicians and attorneys, and the Elks Club. Now a restaurant occupied the old mortuary, and a casino dominated the rest of the building. The security guard liked working in Cripple Creek. Cross-eyed Betty. Hi. So lovely to see you. The historic boom turned ghost town was a magnet for tourists, and the folks working on famous Bennett Street were friendly and welcoming. Maggie's restaurant in the basement of his workplace had good food at good prices, though he was sometimes bothered by the smell of an old-fashioned floral perfume that wafted through the room. It wasn't until after he'd eaten there a few times that he learned the restaurant was named for the ghost that supposedly haunted the building. It was Maggie's perfume that he smelled when he ate in the restaurant, according to stories told by the staff. They also reported that Maggie's high-heeled shoes were often heard walking in the second and third stories of the building, and sometimes a woman's laughter drifted down the stairs. People speculated that Maggie was connected with one of the doctors who had rented office space for the building, but no one really knew who she was in life. The security guard shrugged off the stories. He'd always lumped ghost stories in with fairy tales, something to tell the kiddies. But he'd never seen a ghost, and seeing was believing. One evening, while working the graveyard shift, the security guard was sipping coffee and gazing at the video monitor when a light sprang on in the darkened game room he was viewing. A young woman appeared on the screen, sitting in front of a lit slot machine. He gasped and jumped to his feet in surprise, spilling his coffee. He hardly noticed the sting of hot liquid against his skin, as he was so intent on the picture in front of him. "Hey, Captain Lee." The woman wore a fancy dress with a skirt that flared down to the floor, a silk shirtwaist, and a lacy concoction at her neck. Her dark hair was piled high under tortoiseshell combs, and her eyes danced as she worked the slot machine. A tall gentleman then joined her. He was wearing a long black coat that reached the knees of his formal striped trousers and a fancy top hat that made him look nearly a foot taller than his actual height. One of his hands rested caressingly on the shoulder of the pretty woman, and the other pointed toward the flashing lights of the slot machine. He was laughing, and she glanced coquettishly up at him, her dark eyes shining with happiness. How in blazes did they get in there? The security guard wondered, grabbing his flashlight. The casino was locked up tight as a drum. Surely he would have seen them entering the building on one of the cameras. Here's an illustration. What that coquettish young woman looked like. He raced through the dark building toward the gaming room, realizing he might lose his job over this incident. 2 people had illegally entered the building on his watch, and now they were playing the slots, bold as brass. He reached the top of the stairs. "Oh, I know, Big Mama." Within a minute or two of spying the couple on the video camera, and he stopped in shock. The gaming room was dark and silent. Yep, that's the right spelling. The gaming room was dark and silent. No lights flashed. No woman sat at the slot machine with her top-hatted escort beside her. The room was empty. It couldn't be. It was impossible. Surely they'd heard him coming and were hiding somewhere. He ran down the stairs, flashing his light behind every machine, searching in every dark corner for the intruders. He found nothing. Angry, frustrated, and confused, the security guard returned to the office. He glanced in the camera array and found the gaming room dark in the video monitor. "Hi, Joe." He shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. Had he dozed off somehow and dreamed the whole thing? He didn't feel sleepy. He reached over and rewound the tape, torn between wishing for validation of the incident and hoping that it had never happened at all. A moment later, he was staring at the image of a woman in fancy Victorian dress, sitting in front of the slot machine, her laughing escort beside her, gesturing toward the flashing lights. That is creepy if this really happened, which supposedly it did. Suddenly, they vanished from the screen, and he saw a picture of himself peering down the staircase into the empty gaming room. The security guard watched himself search the room, growing more angry and frustrated with each passing moment. He gazed intently at the video monitor as his image stomped out of the gaming room, complete bafflement on his face. As he disappeared from view, the lights came on again in the gaming room, and the man and woman were once again playing the slot machine and laughing. He watched them in stunned silence as they played another round or two and then vanished as instantly as they had appeared. They were ghosts. They had to be. There was no other explanation for what he was viewing. He broke out in a cold sweat, his hands trembling as he stopped the tape and pulled it from the service, placing it rather too hastily upon a shelf. He reviewed the tape again after he finished his shift. At that moment, he still had a job to do. "Hi, Krista." When his supervisor arrived the next morning, the security guard discussed the incident with him. The supervisor wanted to review the tape with him, so the security guard reached up to the shelf where he'd placed the incriminating video the night before. The tape had vanished. The two men looked at one another, nonplussed, and the security guard felt goosebumps crawling over his skin. As he hurried home after his shift, the security guard pondered the advisability of working in a haunted building. Remembering the incandescent face of the young woman at the slot machine, he found it impossible to remain afraid. If that was Maggie, she meant no harm. She only wanted a little fun. And who was her handsome escort? Her husband? A boyfriend? He'd probably never know. He just hoped he'd have as much fun when he was a ghost himself. Smiling, he let himself into his house, ready for a snack and some shut-eye. Who here really believes in ghosts? For real. I mean, for real. She just wanted some fun, is all. Joe, you do? And Crystal? Yes, I've seen one, Raven. Heidi, how about you? Raven does. Captain Lee. No, only angels. You're not fond of them. Sometimes painted black. I'm like a sometimes too, I think. Okay, this one's called Really, Big Mama? Mama? Not all are bad. Oh, I'm just talking to the chat. The people in the chat. Your grandfather's ghost appeared in photos the day of his funeral. Oh. I mean, I have seen some strange things, especially when I ruptured my stomach and lost 8 pints of blood. Oh my goodness. Wow, really, Big Mama. Mama. Oh, that gives me chills. Okay, now we're going to read Vindicator from Sand Creek Massacre National Historic Site. Colorado again, guys. Everything's Colorado. This is chapter 12. Haunted Colorado. Your lost loved ones are always close. I like to believe that. I hope you're right. I think you are. I passed a man sitting cross-legged on the ground as I made my way toward the monument at Sand Creek Massacre National Historic Site. Hi, LMN. He was wearing the traditional garb of the Cheyenne people, and he was chanting softly to himself. I tiptoed past, not wanting to disturb his meditations at this sacred spot where so many had perished. I clutched the National Park Service pamphlet, crumpling it slightly in my sweaty hands. It was a hot day on the prairie, and a haze made the distant horizon shimmer. But I felt cold inside, terribly cold. I did not want to be here. The story of the Sand Creek Massacre made me writhe inside my skin whenever I thought of what the 3rd Colorado Regiment had done here, but I felt strongly that I needed to visit to honor the dead. And so I had driven down from the mountains, leaving my husband and children to their own devices while I made this pilgrimage. According to my reading, it was the influx of gold miners into Colorado territory that had caused tensions between the Native Americans and the settlers to escalate into armed conflict. John Chivington, the fighting preacher, was looking to win a political nomination by making himself a hero, so he played upon the settlers' fears, railing against the governor's easy stance concerning the Cheyenne and Arapaho until a regiment was raised to deal with the supposed trouble. When he set out with the 3rd Colorado, Chivington was determined to fight any Indians he could find, thus winning himself fame and the political career he craved. When no Cheyenne dog soldiers could be found, the fighting preacher set out to conquer a peaceful native encampment on the Big Bend of Sand Creek, filled with women, children, and the elderly. Excuse me. The village was under the leadership of Chief Black Kettle, a pacifist. Therefore, it had only a few warriors to protect the people living within. They had come to this place seeking to avoid conflict. But on the morning of November 29th, 1864, troops from the 3rd Colorado, led by Chivington, came thundering down the encampment, ignoring the white flag of truce and the American flag that were quickly hoisted above Chief Black Kettle's lodge. I stared unseeing at the simple low monument before me, at the sandy creek and the low scrub. The chill inside me grew worse as I recalled the history of this place. I set off blindly along the bed of the creek, hating what had been done here and hating myself for being a descendant of one of the men who had fought in the 3rd Colorado that day. As I walked, I felt as if I were caught in a bubble of time, halfway between the past and the present. The scene around me remained the same, but I could hear soft voices chanting in the prairie wind, rising and falling as if in prayer. Out of the corner of my eye, I glimpsed an encampment full of teepees But when I turned my head, I saw nothing but prairie beyond the bend in the creek. I heard a dog bark, a child yell in delight, a woman call anxiously. I saw nothing. I don't remember how long I ambled about in this suspended state before I realized I was no longer walking alone. Hello, Vicky. The Cheyenne man I'd seen when I entered the historic site was beside me. I hadn't heard him approach. He was just there, still in a daze. I accepted his presence easily, as if I had been expecting him. "You are troubled," he said as we walked through the prairie grass. "This place disturbs me," I said miserably. "My people did terrible things here." He nodded in sober agreement. "It is true. The things done in this place were terrible indeed. But you did not do them." "I am descended from one who did," I said bitterly. "I've read some of his letters. He was proud of what he'd done. He spoke of scalping children and killing women who were on their knees begging for mercy. He called himself a vindicator." I spat out the last word as if it were a curse. We walked silently for a time. Then, in a dry, unemotional voice, he described for me the chaos of that terrible day in November. The sound of musket fire and artillery shattering the quiet peace of the village, the thunder of nearly 700 horsemen bearing down upon the village as the cavalry charged, warriors scrambling for horses and weapons, women and children screaming in panic, fleeing every which way, teenagers and old men staying behind to face the companies crossing Sand Creek, defending the haphazard retreat, blood flowing everywhere, frightened Cheyenne and Arapaho digging themselves into defendable pits along the creek. Here's an illustration. Hi, Tina Bina. Haven't seen you in a while. Nice to see you. Yes, scalping children. That makes me so ashamed when I hear this stuff. Just like this lady. The men ripped women apart with their knives. They clubbed little children to death until their brains spilled out upon the ground, the elderly man said. "Well, I'm glad you've been in and out. Nice to see you." His dark eyes fixed on the far horizon. "Oh, I believe you're right, Big Mama. Mama, ugh, that gives me chills. We were scalped, beaten, mutilated, torn apart. The fetters of civilization were set aside by the soldiers who attacked us that day. It was the white men who acted like savages. We just ran and died. I hate how we treated the Indians." "I know, LMN." Tears poured down my face as he spoke. I was too choked up to reply, even if I'd had anything to say. The elderly man stopped suddenly and handed me a soft white handkerchief, seemingly conjured from nowhere. I wiped my eyes and blew my nose, then gazed from the soiled handkerchief to the elderly Cheyenne in apology. "I'll have it cleaned," I said quickly. "Keep it," he said with a little smile. Then he sobered and said, "I have a message for you, Cheryl." I jumped, wondering how he knew my name. "People like you make a difference. You're the opposite of your forefather. You are a vindicator for all that is right and true and just. His dark eyes bored deeply into my blue ones. Do not forget this, and do not forget me. I blinked back a second onrush of tears and lifted my chin. His words warmed my chilled heart. I knew I would remember them, and I sensed that in the years to come, I would be forever changed because he had spoken them. I will not forget your words, I said, but I do not know your name. He smiled, and it transformed his face. My name is Black Kettle, he said, and then he vanished. I blinked in astonishment, and the sights and smells of the present day came crashing down around me in a rush of light and color and sound. I found myself standing before the Sand Creek Massacre Monument in the exact place I had been when I first arrived. It was as if my walk along the creek bed had never happened. I shook my head, trying to clear it. Had the last half hour been a waking dream? Was I losing my mind? A warm wind blew softly against my hair, and the scent of dust and prairie grass filled my nostrils, making me sneeze. I reached up to blot my nose, and then I paused in shock. In my right hand, I still clutched a white handkerchief. Ooh, now that's creepy. Okay, now we're at part 2, Powers of Darkness and Light. The Telegram from Palmer Lake, Chapter 13. I was working as the night chief at a telegraph office in Denver when the mysterious call came through from an in-state office identifying itself as AZ. Now I know all the Colorado telegraph office codes. It was one of the first things I learned when I took this job. AZ is not one of them. Someone's messing around, I told the man operating the telegraph. Let's see what happens if I take the key. He nodded, grinning slowly, knowing I did not suffer fools gladly. Excuse me, guys. Here you go, Chief, he said, rising and bowing me into his station. I stepped to the telegraph key, identified myself, and asked the AZ office to identify itself. The remote operator just wired that he was a small relaying office that had an urgent collect message from KS, Kansas City. The Phantom Telegrapher signed the original telegram KS. I frowned for a moment in thought and then had them send the message through. It came so fast, my fingers were numb trying to keep up with it. It read as follows. I grave was my in man easy who rest in not my will time. I on deciphered earth is drink message considerable this and until one divide night or was Ridgway killed continental on the what as is known is as what the on continental killed Ridgway was or night divide one until and this considerable message drink is earth deciphered on I time will my not in rest who easy man in a my was grave and then it's Laksa DR. I stared at the telegram, non-pulsed. It was unsigned, and I didn't recognize the name of the person to whom it was being sent. The operator looked over my shoulder. Looks like some kind of code, he said, but I'm darned if I know the key to it. He glanced sideways at me to see if I'd reprimand him for the darned, for saying darned. I don't know, Tina. We'll find out. I had strict rules about swearing in my office, but darned was on my acceptable list. That's funny, darned. Send the message on, I said. See if they can find this A. Towser, 26 Flower Lane, to whom it's been addressed. Maybe he knows where the AZ relaying office is. Yes, Chief, the operator said, and carried it away with him. I sent a quick wire to Kansas City, inquiring about the message, and then turned away when another operator hailed me from the far side of the office. Back to work, I put the mystery message out of my mind. Getting another drink. I'm not reading too bad for being on a little bit of Ambien tonight. Excuse me. Took a little tiny piece of the Ambien again. Little teeny tiny. My nails aren't dirty. It looks like it though, doesn't it? Ew, look at that. They look so discolored in this light. They look creepy. The hand. The next night, there were 3 messages waiting for me when I stepped into my office. One was the mysterious message with a note attached to it that said, A. Towser was unknown in Denver and Flower Lane didn't exist. The second was from Kansas City, saying the mystery message had not originated from its office. And the third was a second telegram from the mysterious AZ relaying office. It was an exact duplicate of the first, save that it was addressed to another unknown individual. Curiouser and curiouser, I muttered to myself, quoting Alice in Wonderland, the current favorite novel of my young daughter. I went out onto the main floor to ask about the second telegram. The young fellow who'd taken the message said the operator who had sent it from the non-existent AZ office had signed himself KX. Never heard of him, I said, fascinated. I didn't approve of folks breaking the rules or sending expensive telegrams collect, but I loved puzzles, and this one was a dilly. A dilly. Nearly broke my fingers trying to keep up with KX, the young man confessed. Whoever he is, he's fast. Tina, whoever he is, he's fast. Remembering my own difficulties from the night before, I nodded in agreement. I sent messages to all the in-state offices to be on the lookout for telegrams from either the AZ relaying office or an operator called KX. Then I went back to my office to get on with the paperwork. Over the next several weeks, KX sent up his mysterious message every night. The telegrams were said to have originated from many different cities, though Denver was never one of them, and they always came through the AZ relaying office. I carefully read the mysterious message repeatedly, trying to make heads or tails of it. Nothing. I needed the key to the code. If I was in the office when KX sent his message, I would telegraph back immediately, telling him we couldn't read his message. Take it to the cable clerks, KX telegraphed back. We did, but they had no better luck than I did. I was curious. I was upset. I wanted to find KX and give him a piece of my mind for disrupting my orderly night office. Instead, I telegraphed the non existent AZ relaying office and said, "Darn it, give me a key." I wasn't expecting an answer, but one came through a minute later. 1, 3, 1, 3, forward, backward, either way, okay? Okay, either way, okay. My eyes widened. So simple. I grabbed a copy of the telegram from my desk and started reading every other word, and KX was correct. The message read the same forward and backward. Tina Bina, you're pretty good there. It said, I was a man who in my time on earth drank considerable, and one night was killed on what is known as the Continental Ridgeway or Divide. Until this message is deciphered, I will not rest easy in my grave. R.D. Haskell. Ew, that's giving me the creeps right there. A chill ran through my body, and goosebumps pricked up all over my arms and legs. The telegram was from a ghost. We had a specter on the wire. I broke out into a cold sweat, and my hands trembled so bad they made the paper rattle. Everyone in the office was staring at me. "Did you solve it, Chief?" one of the operators asked in a diffident tone. I nodded and read the message aloud to my staff. We'd been trying to solve the puzzle for weeks now. They deserved to know. A few folks gasped when they realized what the telegram meant. One fellow turned white as a sheet and had to be helped into a chair. "So what now?" asked the night operator, who took the very first message from KX. "Now we ask," I said grimly. I opened my key, contacted the AZ relaying office, and typed in "don't 13," which is telegraph speak for "I don't understand." The whole staff clustered around me, waiting breathlessly for a response. A moment later, the sounder rattled to life, conveying a new message in flawless Morse. When deciphered using the same key as the first, it said, I was a telegrapher who at one time worked in New York State. In 1849, I caught the gold fever and came west. I drank considerably and was killed one night in a drunken brawl out on the old Pueblo Trail. Bless you. 15 miles from what is now Palmer Lake on the Continental Divide. I cannot rest in my grave. My spirit is tied to earth until I make known the cause of my death. The telegraph pole from which I am sending this is planted directly over my grave. the butt of the pole resting on my breast. I will call you up regularly for 3 nights. And if I raise you, answer. My message reads backward, the same as forward. R.D. Haskell. Ew. There was a long silence when I finished reading the new message. On the desk, the circuit remained opened, as if it were listening for our response. Suddenly, 2 of my operators laughed. "It's a joke. It has to be," one of them exclaimed. The sounder clattered suddenly. No joke. Then the circuit was cut off from the other end. "Permission to find the pole, Chief?" one of the 2 disbelievers asked. "We can catch the joker red-handed the next time he keys in." I nodded. The 2 operators grinned triumphantly and turned away to plan their journey. I glanced at the others still clustered around my desk. Their faces were pale, and I saw that I was not the only one who thought the spirit's message was real. I gave another nod of understanding, and a sigh went up from everyone still present. "I wouldn't go to that pole if you paid me a king's ransom in gold," muttered one youngster as the operators returned to their post. I saw more than one head nod in agreement. The 2 skeptics were gone for 2 nights. On the first night, a message came from KX saying, "Do you believe me? Answer, please." I telegraphed back, "I believe. Not all here do. I am sending 2 skeptics to your pole." On the second night, a longer message came through, and I smiled when I read it and sent off a quick acknowledgement. Then I sat down to wait. My skeptics would return to their duties the following night. On the third evening, 2 ashen-faced operators came sheepishly into my office. "We followed the road out from Palmer Lake, heading toward the divide," the more senior operator said when I asked for his report. We counted each pole until we reached the 15-mile mark. There we stopped and settled down to wait for our joker. We waited all afternoon and into the evening. It had just grown dark when we saw. He broke off in distress and glanced appealingly at his younger companion. Look at this illustration. Hello, Leslie Romani, my sweet friend. Look at this. Can you guys make this out? The telephone pole or the telegram wire right over the guy's grave. You can't see that, Joe Glover? You can't see the figure in the pole? The man? Now that is creepy. Ugh. Ugh. That is giving me the creeps. The junior operator squared his shoulders, took a deep breath, and said, "The air got real cold around us, worse than anything I've felt in winter." Then we saw a light appear at the bottom of the pole. A glowing vapor poured out of the ground all around the pole, and it became the figure of a man. He was the throbbing from white light to blue. It made my eyes water, and he held a telegraph key in his glowing hand. The junior operator paused, his body trembling at the memory. A shudder went through my body, and I had goosebumps covered my body as I listened to the tale. I nodded to the senior operator to finish the story. The older man had to clear his throat twice before he continued. The The specter climbed to the top of the pole and cut into the wires. Then he telegraphed something on his key. When he was done, he slid down the pole and kept right on going when he reached the ground, sort of flowing into it like water goes down a drain, until there was nothing left but darkness. Both men gulped then, and I saw that they were sweating in the strain of their storytelling. Without saying a word, I handed them the translation of the telegram the ghost had sent last night. Your 2 investigators here. They have seen me. Farewell to Earth. I have been heard and seen. I am satisfied. Goodbye. R.D. Haskell. The 2 men stared from the message to me and back, speechless. Well done, I said after a moment. I waved them out of my office to tell the rest of the staff what they'd seen. I closed my door when they were gone, and for the last time, I opened a circuit to the AZ relaying station. My skeptics have reported in as true believers. Well done, I typed. The sounder rattled back immediately. Thank you, thank. With a sad smile, I typed back, rest in peace, my friend. I received an acknowledgement of receipt, but no reply. None was needed. We never heard from R.D. Haskell again. That's creepy, isn't it? Probably going to read one more. Really, Tina? What happened? Tell us what happened, and then I'll read this last story for the night. Was it by someone's grave? It's a long story, huh? Yep, long story. One's husband died before he was father of both kids. Kind of a message of some sort. That sounds interesting. It really does sound interesting. Leslie Romani's like, wow. Yeah, it sounds like it's interesting. Okay, unexpected witness. This will be, I am dropping my phone. Okay. It's chapter 14, and it's in Eureka, Colorado. Okay, he was sleeping with both girls and fathered both their kids. What? Only revealed after his death. Wow. Really, Crystal? What does first generation ghost stories mean? Leslie. Did they kill him? Tina, I'm teasing. Wow. Really, Tina? I do know what you mean, Leslie. Wow. He fell off a boat and motor hit his head. Oh, they happen to people I know. It passes down through generations. Oh, Crystal, you and Tina are both freaking me out. They're happy ones? Oh, yeah, the blades. I'm supposed to get you guys scared. You guys are getting me scared now. Yeah. Yeah, I'd like to hear more about both of those stories sometime. Okay, I'm going to read this last one and then get to bed. The ambience starting to kick in. That little teeny tiny. Ooh, and these look dirty too. Look, guys. Ooh, really, Tina? Yeah, Leslie, I've heard that. You gotta send into the light. They don't realize they passed. Yeah. Ugh. Okay then. I frowned down at the page of notes in my hand. The lantern flickered in a light breeze that came through my office window as I glared at the paper, willing the words to change. But alas, no amount of willing could alter this case. I had been an attorney for many years and had developed a sixth sense that told me when my clients were guilty and when they were innocent. My sixth sense had never been wrong, and it was telling me that my client, Christopher Johnson, was innocent. However, my intuition was not admissible as evidence in court, and the evidence that was admissible, though circumstantial, was incriminating in the extreme. Johnson had a motive. Oh boy, did he have a motive. The murdered man had won a lawsuit against him over some mining property. Johnson had been seen in the vicinity of the victim's cabin on the night Jack Wilson was murdered. John was known to own a large hunter's dirk, and the victim had been murdered with a very large knife that had perforated his chest multiple times and had almost severed both his arms and his head. Actually, I was surprised that Johnson was still alive. Wilson was very popular among his fellow miners, and it was only Johnson's prompt arrest that kept him from being lynched by a mob. At the moment, a double guard protected Johnson at the prison to discourage anyone from breaking in and hanging the man before he got to trial. I got some ugly stares from the townsmen lounging near the jail when I went to visit the suspect earlier this evening. A few of them jeered at me for taking the case, and I was forced to remind them that a person was supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. He's already been proven guilty, snapped one of Wilson's friends. Not by a judge and jury, he hasn't, I replied with dignity. I stared at the man until he flushed and turned away. When I entered his cell, Johnson looked up at me without hope. I sat awkwardly on the bed opposite him and asked him to repeat his story once again. He claimed to have been walking to the mine, where he had been asked to take the night shift for a friend. He had just passed Wilson's cabin, he recalled, which was directly on the trail to the mine, when he was taken ill with a stomach malady. He said he returned home to sleep off his sickness without reporting into the mine. No one had seen him leave or return to his cabin, although a few of the men on the night shift had seen him on the path leading to the mine. Worse, Johnson claimed that his knife had disappeared from his cabin on the day before the murder. I stared into the man's eyes as he spoke, and I knew in my gut he wasn't lying, but there was no proof of his innocence, and even he did not believe he would be set free. Now, back in my office, I threw my pen down on the top of my notes in frustration, spattering ink everywhere. I was too tired to think straight, so I laid down on the couch in my office to get some rest, still wondering how I could convince a jury that my client was innocent. It was a puzzle I could not solve. Finally, I blew out the lantern and fell into a restless sleep. I don't have a clue how to do. Okay, Leslie, yes. I want to try. Yeah, I do. Maybe we'll both learn together. That'll be fun. Yes, deal. I awoke suddenly, my body frozen into stillness, aware that I was no longer in the room. I peered carefully through my eyelashes, remembering that I had left my pistol in the desk drawer where it would not be easy to reach. To my surprise, the room was filled with an eerie, flickering blue light. And you just said blue light, Tina. Silhouetted against the unnatural light was the figure of a woman in a heavy veil. Okay, Leslie. She moved toward my prone figure and intoned in a voice that sounded faint and far away. Christy Johnson is innocent of the crime of which he is charged. My heart slammed in my throat, and I was filled with a sudden excitement. I didn't know who this woman was, and at the moment, I didn't care. She could play all the funny light tricks she wanted, as long as she gave me something to help clear my client. How can I prove it? I asked eagerly. I will be at the trial, and I will give my testimony, said the faint voice from the veiled silhouette. As I opened my mouth to question her, vanished, and the blue light went out. I gasped in astonishment, and my body went all cold and shaky for a moment. It took 3 tries for me to get the lantern lit, and then I examined every window, every door. They were all locked. Finally, I sank down onto the couch with my head in my hands. Had I dreamed the whole thing? I didn't know how to answer that question, any more than I knew how to clear my client of the charges against him. I lay down again on the couch, but I didn't fall asleep again that night. I entered the courtroom 2 days later, still at a loss. The best appeal I could make would probably not be good enough to clear Johnson, and I had no idea if the veiled woman had been a bad dream or just a figment of my imagination. Or the thought crossed my mind, she might have been what my grandmother called a forerunner. Hi, Christine. I'm glad you did too. It's the last story. I'm almost done, but at least you made it. Thank you. I do appreciate it. A forerunner was a vision or a premonition of what is to come. Granny had stories of lights appearing outside of a house where someone was doomed to die, and tales of people who had spirit traveled in their dreams to speak to loved ones or to warn someone of approaching ill fate. The veiled woman had said she would testify today in court, so obviously she had to be alive to do so. Had she been spirit walking in her dreams? Had she been spirit walking in her dreams when she appeared to me? I shook my head to clear it. It was probably nonsense. I had dreamed the whole thing. I squared my shoulders and went to take my place at the defendant's table. The room was crowded with sensation seekers from surrounding mining camps. Word of the horrible crime had spread quickly, and the men filling the room had already condemned my client with their minds. Johnson was brought in under heavy guard, and angry looks were cast upon him from every side. Was it possible for the jury to be impartial under such circumstances? I wondered with a sinking heart. When my client pleaded not guilty to the murder charge, the room erupted in hisses and shouts, and the crier had to roar repeatedly to restore order. The district attorney opened the case with a rousing speech about the bloodthirsty nature of the crime, and then called witness after witness to testify against my client. Then it was my turn. I gave perhaps the very best speech of my career, warning the jury that the blood of a guiltless man would be on their hands if they condemned my client on purely circumstantial evidence. I had no witnesses to call and was about to close for the defense when a paper was thrust into my hands. It said, "Call Mary Powers." Ugh. Yes, they are, Leslie. I totally agree. Turning to the court, I said, "May it please your honor, I have one witness to examine." I handed the paper to the crier, who called Mary Powers to the stand. A small commotion ensued from the back of the room, and then a heavily veiled woman dressed in all black stepped forward. I immediately recognized my midnight visitor. When she arrived at the stand, she threw back her veil, revealing the most classically beautiful face I have ever beheld. Her loveliness took my breath for a moment until I saw the lines of care around her eyes and mouth. I was not alone in my wonder. A stir passed through the crowd, and every eye in the jury was fixed upon her as she was sworn in. At my rather incoherent prompting, she told us the following story. I was born and raised in the East, and there I met a handsome young man who was introduced to my family through letters of recommendation given to him by a mutual friend. His frequent visits to our house resulted in an engagement between us, but he put off naming the day of marriage, although to my shame, he did not put off other matters that we should have saved for marriage. After causing my ruin, he fled the East Coast rather than put matters to right, and I fell ill for many weeks, hovering between life and death in a terrible fever that would not break. For a moment, her voice faltered. She bowed her head and took a couple of deep breaths. Then she looked up, tears bright upon her cheeks, and continued. Recovery came to me at last, and with it a terrible thirst for revenge against the man who had betrayed me. For years I sought news of this man, and my weary waiting was rewarded at last when I learned he had come to Colorado to look for gold. I followed at once and made cautious inquiries about him when I reached the territory. Those inquiries led me at last to a remote cabin. As I approached along the path, fate took a hand, for my eyes beheld a glint of sunlight coming from a knife that had been dropped upon the ground. This knife, she pulled out a large hunting dirk that belonged to Johnson. She held it high for all to see and then continued her tale. I peered in the window of the cabin and saw my betrayer, the man calling himself Jack Wilson, asleep on his bed. I crept into the cabin and over to his bed and plunged the knife into his heart. And then she hesitated, swallowed, and looked down at the knife in her hands. I think the sight of his blood maddened me, for suddenly I was screaming a list of his crimes at the top of my lungs as I stabbed blindly at my betrayer again and again. I don't remember leaving the cabin or much of anything else since then. The woman, calling herself Mary Powers, gazed suddenly at my client, and her beautiful lips quivered as their eyes met. There was a look on her face that I couldn't read, though I sensed it was important. Here's the Hi, Jennifer. Oh, I'm glad you found me. Lovely to have you here. I'm almost done reading, though, but you made it. I don't know. I guess we'll find out right now. Mary Powers tore her gaze away from Johnson at last and looked over at the jury. Her face twisted until a manic caricature of hate devoured its loveliness, and she cried, "The only thing that matters now is that I have my revenge, is that I have had my revenge." And so saying, she plunged the knife into her own breast and slumped over, hot blood pouring all over the floor. The courtroom erupted with shrill cries of horror and confusion. It was not until the woman's dead body was carried out that order was at last restored. Upon instruction from the judge, the jury rendered a unanimous verdict of not guilty for my client without even leaving their seats to deliberate. Johnson was in a daze as we left the courthouse together. He could not believe he had been set free by the testimony of that lovely, demented woman. "Why?" Johnson asked me in bewilderment. "Why did she do it? She didn't know me. I was just some dumb miner who could have taken the fall for her. Anyone else would have made a clean getaway and left me to hang. Why did she turn herself in?" I had no answer for him. I'd caught a glimpse of something in Mary Powers' face when she looked at my client, but I had been unable to interpret her expression, and now I would never know. The woman was buried in a grove of pine trees near the trail to the mine. There was no name to put on her tomb, save that of Mary Powers, which was probably an alias. There was no one to inform of her death, for she had left nothing to identify herself behind. Hers was a lonely grave, though not one unadorned, for there were always wildflowers placed beside the simple cross. Once I saw Johnson sneaking into the grove of pines, a posy of flowers in his big hands, and a look of half defiant shame on his ruggedly handsome features. And it was in that moment that I finally understood why Mary Powers had turned herself in. She'd fallen in love with my client, and she had died to make things right. The end. And that's it, guys, for the night. Oh, whoa. Thanks, guys. Don't forget I have a channel, Jennifer. Subscribe to me or prescribe. Prescribe. Okay, guys, thank you so much. Have a wonderful, not every night, Jennifer, but I try to a few nights a week. Sometimes it's early in the evenings and sometimes it's really late, like now. Okay? I hope you come back. It's nice seeing you. Okay, guys. See you later. Thank you, Jennifer. Bye, guys. See you next time. See you tomorrow. Carolyn's.